지금부터 지속가능 성장의 인재 경영이라는 주제로 5번째 세션을 시작하겠습니다. 본 세션의 좌장은 스테판 플로리, SK텔레콤 HR 담당자께서 맡아주시겠습니다. Mr. Stefan Flory.
Test. 안녕하세요. 오늘 여러분을 만나게 돼서 반갑습니다. 저는 스티븐 프롤리, SK 글로벌 HR 그룹장입니다. 미안하지만 오늘 영어로 진행하겠습니다. Good afternoon and welcome to today's session entitled Talent Fostering Strategies for Sustainable Growth, Lessons from Overseas Enterprises Enjoying Longevity. Whew, wow, that's a very long title, isn't it? My name is Steve Frawley, and I'm your moderator for today's session. And I have to tell you, talent management is something that has been near and dear to my heart for a number of years. Just to make a couple of cases in point, a recent CEO Challenge survey that involved 539 executives from around the world asked them, what are some of your top concerns that you have? What's keeping you up at night? And their response, 80% of them said, talent, having enough talent to run our organizations. Some time ago, I was at Microsoft's headquarters in Redmond, Washington, and I happened to overhear in an HR planning session some comments from some of Microsoft's top HR executives. And what they were saying was this: if you took the 20 top executives and removed them from Microsoft, you would have a mediocre company. A mediocre company. You know, as I look out into this audience today, I see people that bring very different gifts and talents. And I think and have always felt personally that one of the most important roles that HR plays is to help unleash the talent within our organizations. And it's a real privilege to do that, and it's not always an easy job. So it's an honor and a privilege to introduce a distinguished panel of experts today to discuss today's topic. But before I introduce each of the panel members, let me discuss the format for today's session. We're a little bit longer session today than some of the previous sessions. So Tim Ringo and Scott Draw will each provide us with informative presentations on talent management. Then our other panelist members, Dr. Andy Park and Dr. Kichan Park, will then ask some questions of each of our presenters. After that, our panelists will then engage in a dialogue talking about a variety of topics related to talent management. And then finally, at the end of today's session, then, we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So let me now take this opportunity to introduce our esteemed panel members. First of all, Andy Park. It's really been a pleasure for me to get to know Andy since I've been here in Korea. Andy is a country manager and co-representative of the Korean office of Mercer, as most of us are familiar, a global consulting company. Dr. Park has engaged in a variety of projects regarding global talent management strategy, post-merger human resource integration strategy, strategic performance management and reward management, organization development and competency development. And he's done this for major domestic companies here in Korea, as well as branches of international, multinational companies here. Before joining Mercer, Andy was with Anderson Business Consulting, where he carried out a wide range of projects for leading companies in Korea. He is the recipient of a bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's degree in business administration from Yonsei University. and he also holds a PhD in business administration from Tennessee State University. Besides consulting, Andy has provided a number of lectures on global human resource management, organization activation, and strategic HR management. He is currently an adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Governance at Sungkyunkwan Kwan University. So our next panelist I'd like to introduce is Dr. Ki-Chan Park. And if any of you here have an interest in doing any kind of research, this is a person that you ought to get to know. Ki-Chan is a prolific author. What I've learned about him, he has published over 145 publications on a wide range of topics. He is currently professor at Inha University in the School of Business Administration in the Asia Pacific School of Logistics. His educational background is quite impressive. It includes a PhD degree from HEC University in Paris. And I had the distinct pleasure of spending some time at HEC about 8 months ago. He also has a DEA degree from IEP in Paris, as well as a BA and MBA in business, both from Seoul National University. As I mentioned, he's been a professor, but he's also a chairman, has been a chairman since May of 2009 with the Korea Academy of Business Ethics, or CABE, as it's called here in Korea. In addition, since October 2000, he's been a committee member with the Incheon Regional Labor Conciliation. His research interests are quite broad and include business ethics and social responsibility, management innovation, economic and social performance, knowledge management, air transportation and logistics, and CEO and team performance appraisal. We had a meeting, several of us, the other night to talk about getting ready for this session, and everybody was going, where is Ki-Chan? Where is he? Well, he had a meeting, I think, with President Lee. So this gives you some idea of the significance that Ki-Chan has played here in Korea. So I'd like to also introduce a person that you have heard at a previous session. His name is Scott Draw. Scott is Human Resources Director at Boeing International. And Scott was named Human Resource Director for Boeing International in October 2006. He's responsible for leading the function that provides HR services for Boeing International employees in more than 20 locations around the world. He also works with organizations across the company to improve the global delivery of human resource support to employees and Boeing entities operating outside of the U.S. Scott is a graduate of Louisiana State University and has a master's degree in industrial relations from Louisiana Tech University. He's certified by the Human Resources Certification Institute as a senior professional in human resources. He served 6 years in the Louisiana State Army National Guard, is a member of Rotary International, the Society for Human Resource Management, and the International Association of Business Communicators. The next person I'd like to introduce is Tim Ringo. Tim, as you know, was our opening moderator and is currently a global leader of the Human Capital Management Services for IBM Global Business Services in London, where he has overall responsibility for more than 2,000 human capital management professionals around the world. Their focus is helping clients enable enterprise innovation and performance through improved workforce effectiveness. Tim joined IBM Global Business Services in 2000 after 16 years at Accenture, where he was executive partner in Accenture's Human Performance service line. He brings a wealth of experience in defining and successfully implementing large-scale human capital programs that produce measurable results for clients. He began his career in human capital in '92 in the Columbus, Ohio office of Anderson Consulting. He relocated to London in 1997, where he lives today with his family. Originally from Dayton, Ohio, Tim graduated from the Ohio State University. We call that a Buckeye. And he has a bachelor's degree in business administration, majoring in finance. He also studied English literature at Ohio State and New College in Oxford, England. Tim is a sought-after speaker on the topic of human capital management in HR. He speaks on a variety of subjects, including HR of the future, talent management, globally integrated HR, collaboration and social networking, and a variety of other subjects. And finally, he's co-authoring a book for Harvard Business School called Calculating Success, which I think will be out shortly. Lastly, let me quickly introduce myself. My career spans over 25 years in the learning and organization development, human resources, and strategic planning areas. I currently serve as the Senior Vice President of Global Human Resources and Future Management Institute for SK Telecom, a division of Fortune 100 SK Group. I've enjoyed throughout my career creating and implementing sustainable global business solutions, improving leadership, team, and organizational capability. And I just want to add, I've been living here in Seoul now. This is my 15th month. And it's been quite a assignment for me. It's quite a unique challenge. At SK Telecom, we have just over 100 executives on staff, and 99 of them are Korean. So it's quite a unique challenge and a lot of fun. So my prior company experience includes leadership assignments with General Electric, PepsiCo, Amoco, Seagate Technology, Best Buy, Honeywell, and Selectron. And one of my favorite bosses that I ever worked for is sitting in this audience today, one of our keynote speakers, Dr. Carrie Williard, who I had the pleasure of working with at Selectron. So my areas of practice include the following: leadership and talent management, strategic business planning, change management, team building and development, international OD, culture alignment, and a variety of areas. I have a Bachelor of Science in Business from the University of Minnesota, Master's in Human Resources, also from Minnesota. I know we have a number of Minnesota grads that have attended the conference, and an MBA from the University of Houston, and a doctorate in Learning and Organization Development from the University of St. Thomas. So that's a little bit about your panelists today. I think you'll agree, lots of great experience and accreditation. And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to invite Tim Ringo to the podium to deliver his presentation on talent fostering strategies. Tim?
The microphone is on. Can you hear me? Is the microphone working? There we go. Now we're going. Thank you very much, Stephen, for that very kind introduction. Stephen's asked me to talk about IBM today, and what does IBM do to create and foster talent? But I thought what I would do first is to put that into a little bit of context as to why talent is important, not just for IBM, but for all of you. My consulting practice did a bit of research at the beginning of this year with the Human Capital Institute. I asked my team to look at some of the studies that had taken place that link effective talent management to shareholder value, and to kind of do our own take on that. And I want to share that with you first, and then I'll go into a little bit of what IBM do in terms of managing talent. So just to set the stage, this is something that all of us are facing in terms of just a general marketplace understanding. First of all, what are the primary forces behind organizations thinking more strategically about their workforces? First of all, the exponential pace of change, and that's been around for a very long time, but the fact is it's actually accelerating. and is particularly accelerating at the beginning of the 21st century. Second is the intensity of the complexity of what's now a very interconnected world. And again, that's something that's been around for a while, but globalization and the impact of globalization is creating even more interconnected world. But then, of course, comes a lot of complexity with that. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's impacted IBM, which really gets to point number 3, and this is something that you would hear Sam Palmisano, the chairman and CEO of IBM, talk a lot about, which is the idea of a globally integrated enterprise. And this is very important for a number of organizations in the world. One of the ways that IBM has been able to perform so well during the downturn throughout 2008 and 2009 is really down to the fact that we created and implemented a globally integrated approach to how we go to market. And I'll talk about how we manage talent in that context, but that's a very important part of IBM's success. And the fourth one is something I don't have to remind you of. Everybody is feeling it at the moment. You always have to manage costs, but of course at the moment, in what's considered a severe downturn, will probably go down as in history as the Great Recession. HR in particular is asked to demonstrate yet more productivity and yet more efficiency. So all of these things really in the past year have intensified quite dramatically. So let's look at the project methodology and what did we do exactly. So as I said, this was about just the beginning of the downturn. So these are some of the things that we wanted to go out and do. First of all, we wanted to understand the extent to which organizations were using talent management practices and really to try to identify, secondly, the impact of talent management practices on organizational performance and what impact did that have on shareholder performance. The third point is really to provide insights into how organizations use talent management to improve their organization effectiveness. We did a mixture of a web-based survey to reach as many people as we could, 1,900 responses that we received. We then followed that up with nearly 50 direct interviews, face-to-face interviews. We then did financial analysis on 287 of the companies of the 1,900 that responded. And then we did secondary research to sort of validate our findings, and I'll share that with you today. So first of all, what I wanted to do is just put up kind of how does IBM define integrated talent management? What are the key elements for that? And we really see it as kind of 6 dimensions. First of all, development. So how do you train? How do you create a strategy and implement that across your organization? Second is attracting and retaining. How do you find talent? How do you bring it in and keep it? How do you motivate and develop that talent over time? And then increasingly important is the deploy and manage part, which is how do you take what's in IBM's case, a global organization, and how do we get the right people with the right skills in the right place at the right time? Very, very important. And then an emerging dimension, which is how do you then connect and enable? How do you use social networking? How do you use collaboration to improve performance of an organization? And lastly, transform and sustain. So it's great to have all the 5 previous dimensions, but if you can't sustain it over time, if you don't treat transformation as a constant activity, then really none of the other 5 domains matter. So what's our point of view? In IBM, we look at, when we say integrated talent management, this is what we mean. We essentially say, how do you take enterprise strategy and then implement that across the entire organization in a standard fashion and in a way that achieves the objectives that the chairman and the board have set out? And we see very importantly, as we outlined a moment ago, so these are the very domains that we talked about a moment ago, essentially you see attracting and retaining, motivating and developing, connecting and enabling, and deploying and managing as an integrated approach to talent management. This is how we kind of define it in that respect. And these are the dimensions. So what we mean by that: performance management, learning and development, collaboration and portals, which again, if you heard me speak on yesterday, increasingly becoming a very important human capital process, and then workforce management, which is essentially how do you deploy and manage your workforce over time. And then, as I said, the importance of being able to transform and sustain over time, which gives you your enterprise performance in the end. So it was quite clear early on in our surveying. These were the four main themes that were emerging. First of all, and I think actually the most important one, and the one I'm going to focus on today, is understanding the payoff from talent management. It's great to talk about talent management, and it's great to say, you know, we are effective talent managers. But in the end, if it's not having any financial payoff, it's very hard to justify, and it's also very hard to continue that transformation and sustaining it. The second one was closing the gap between workforce strategy and execution. You know, while organizations recognize the value of talent management, they don't necessarily understand exactly how to implement it. And we found in our surveying a big gap between intention and execution, which was a major problem for a number of organizations, particularly in the space of workforce analytics. Having basic data on your workforce, you can understand exactly who is in your workforce, where are they, how have you deployed them, what level of skills they have, and that sort of thing. The third point was something we called surviving corporate adolescence. And in the responses that we had from companies around the world, about 40 to 50% of them were organizations that were between 1 and 10,000 employees. And what we found was pretty startling, that those organizations were the least likely to have effective talent management practices when they were compared to larger global organizations, something that surprised us a little bit. You would think that when organizations had a sort of smaller set of workforce to deal with, that implementing talent management would be an easier thing to do, but the survey told us otherwise. And lastly, competing through effective talent management. So we also found that by industry, some industries were better at implementation of talent management and execution than others, and that one probably doesn't surprise you too much. But we found some very distinct differences across industries, which did surprise us a little bit. Now, unfortunately, today I've only got 20 minutes, so I can't go through all four of these. And so I'm going to focus on the first one, which I think is the most important, because it's really down to why do talent management. It comes down to the money. So the key findings, we talked about the value of talent management. These were the couple of things that we found. First of all, organizations that apply talent management practices and do it in a consistent way across the organization, across geography, throughout the survey, had much higher profitability than their industry peers. And this is important because it validates a number of other surveys very, very similar to this. So the BASI organization, who have done a very good job of showing organizations that apply effective talent management and that linkage to shareholder value. So we found very much the same thing. Second point, financial outperformers. So those that are the leaders in their industry, when we cut it by industry, were much more likely, 90% more likely, to focus on measuring and addressing employee engagement and then aligning incentives to company strategy. So very important reasons to do talent management. Oops. So it was also pretty clear to us when we went through the data that there was about 6 different types of organizations in terms of their level of maturity from talent management. At the bottom, we had what we called observers, so those that were kind of watching what others were doing but weren't really doing much in terms of implementing talent management themselves. We found that it was the vast majority of organizations, it was smaller organizations that were observing versus implementing. We then saw, coming up from the bottom, early investors, so those who were starting to put in place the technology and the processes. Again, they tended to be smaller organizations. And then we get into the tiers where people were getting much more sophisticated about talent management, and we categorize them as the engineers, or those that are building the infrastructure to support the population, all the way through ultimately to the optimizers, those that had implemented globally integrated talent management and had begun achieving the financial benefits of that. So when you take those, and we called this supergroup number 1, and when we looked at the financial performance of those organizations, you can see from the engineers, which was not quite as mature, for instance, as the optimizers, a pretty significant difference in terms of their financial performance. You can see going from right to left, that those that were optimizers of talent management had much better shareholder performance and profitability performance. And then when you take that to the smaller organizations, the ones that were more the observers and the early investors that were early getting into talent management, or what we called supergroup number 2, we saw an even incredibly bigger gap between those two. So again, it validates what we saw in the first group as well. And lastly, I just wanted to point out, this is from Bassi and McCure, Maximizing Your Return on People from 2007. Again, we saw the same sort of things. So shareholder value and maturity in terms of level of implementation of talent management. So this was important. So really the main message I wanted to get across here was that those companies, and it's not a big surprise, those companies that do maximize their talent and use sophisticated talent management techniques are going to be outperformers. So let's talk a little bit now about IBM. And many of you have probably seen our Smarter Planet. We also have a Smarter People proposition, and that's where we both look at ourselves as a company being hopefully fairly sophisticated about talent management, but also my team in consulting go out and help other organizations. So there's sort of three key things when you look at IBM and how and why we call ourselves a globally integrated enterprise. First of all, the global marketplace. IBM, in particular Sam Palmisano, our chairman, looked at the market in 2003 and said, really, if we're going to be successful going out 5 or 6 years from now, we have to have the ability to grab business and market share anywhere in the world that we can find it. And that was fairly prescient when you think about the downturn, because when 2008 came along, we were able to execute very, very quickly and go to parts of the world that were still doing well. For instance, China, where we've seen a lot of growth in our business. We were able to go and capture a lot of business because we were able to very quickly shift talent to China to go and sell and service our proposition. So the global marketplace, this ability to go and capture business wherever it is. The second one then was to have that global support function. So we had to have a globally integrated HR in order to be able to know where our people were and then to shift them and deploy them to parts of the world that were still doing very well in terms of business. So HR, finance, supply chain, those have all been globally integrated functions now. And lastly, just having a culture, one that reflects those priorities, which says we will go and find the business wherever it is and we will be successful in doing that. So having that mindset. And that's really what we set out to do in 2003, and we finished in about 2007, 2008, which has allowed us to have some tremendous performance over the past couple of years, which I'll show you in a moment. So what does that mean for HR? So Randy McDonald, who was the HR Executive of the Year last year, this was what he called his objectives and quota. So in 2003, Sam explained to Randy that what he needed was an organization that could be very agile and we could move people and resources around very quickly. So Randy had to undertake a transformation of HR in order to achieve that. So first of all, the first thing was focus HR work on strategic work aligned with our business. So Randy's idea was to take the administrative part of HR and put it in the back office and really take the remainder of headcount in HR and focus it on helping the business to execute on its goals. So what did that mean? That meant that the only people who could talk and continue today can talk to HR directly or use HR are the senior executives in the company. All people below vice president use the call center or web-based portal to do anything related to HR. And the HR managers in the business are sat with the business managers to actually execute on corporate strategy. So therefore, we develop and utilize our global competencies very, very well by having this ability to have HR there at the table to drive talent decisions and help us get the right people in the right place at the right time. So our top priority in all of this is talent management, the model I showed you earlier, which is to attract and retain, motivate and develop, connect and enable and deploy in a standard fashion around the world. And these are the results. So 2008, you can see going from sort of really that was more the late 90s rather than the early 90s, We shifted HR operations centers from 150 down to 8. We went from 0% of HR back office serviced in shared service centers to 70%. That's now up to 80% in 2009. We vastly reduced HR applications, particularly talent applications, and that will soon be down to 1, which will be SAP HR. And you can see the resultant impact on headcount. So when we moved a lot of these things to the back office, it had a huge impact on our costs. And you can see there, best in class ratio retained HR to employees, 1 to 115. Very good for a big company like IBM. So what was the impact of that? Well, this is the chart that Randy uses to show what he describes. We flipped the model. We went from a administration-based HR organization to one that was completely focused on HR strategy and programs and policies. And those programs and policies were all around talent management. It wasn't anything to do with benefits or compensation or anything like that. This was all about performance managing, putting objectives together, deploying people in the right places. And that's really what we've been able to do in the short space of about 6 years, is flip that model. And so this is sort of the changing mindset of HR within IBM. So you can see with the traditional paradigm on the left, which we're all familiar with, to one which is on the right, which if you work in IBM today and you're an executive in the organization, you'll find that your HR people know the business strategy and know how to execute it as well as you do. They're focused on benefits realization, very process-focused, strategy-focused, focused on measuring the business benefits delivered. We're getting very good at our HR data analytics now in terms of being able to show impact of decisions, HR decisions, and then the dollar impact of that. And in the end, it drives a global consistency in terms of how we manage our workforce. So how has this all manifested itself? Well, in 2008, we had, and keep this in mind, IBM has been around for nearly 100 years. We had record revenues, $103 billion. Record pre-tax profit of $16 billion. Earnings per share at $8.93 per share. And record free cash flow. And Sam Palmisano and Mark Lockridge, our CFO, announced what we're expecting to do for full year in 2009. And it's going to be a significant improvement on that record year. We're going to see record revenues heading up towards $120 billion. We're going to see earnings per share getting close to $10 per share. And this is significant. This is given the severity of the downturn, this is going to be some tremendous performance. And in fact, Sam sort of called at least for IBM, an end to the recession from our perspective. And we're going to see a return to growth on the revenue side and the sales side in Q4, which he announced as part of our Q3 results. So, if Sam were standing here right now, he would tell you that unless we had changed HR, if we hadn't flipped that model and we hadn't implemented a globally integrated approach to talent management, there's no way we would have been able to achieve this. We would not have been able to shift our workforce, shift our business to the parts of the world where we could get business and take advantage of that. There would have been no way to do that. We would have had a pretty miserable couple of years. So he puts a huge amount of credit to Randy McDonald and our HR organization for its ability to completely transform itself from an administrative type organization to one that was all about managing talent, and that's all it did. And that allowed us to have some tremendous results. And we all hope that that maintains. But fact is that the journey will continue. It's been 6 years in the making. But as I showed you earlier in that model, transform and sustain, it's a constant battle, if you will. We're going to have to constantly get better at how we manage our talent. And I think if Randy were standing here right now, the thing he would say is probably our biggest challenge going forward around talent and talent management is we still don't feel like we have the kind of data analytics that we need. We also feel that in HR, the HR people don't have the ability to manage and analyze that data. So in HR, we have to get a lot better at our own ability to analyze and understand data and take decisions on it. So Randy thinks we can do a lot better in that respect in terms of our skills. So that's how our transformation will go on from here. But I think just to close, if you were to ask employees, and I'm a fairly recent addition to IBM. I've only been in IBM for 3 years. If you were to ask me, how did that approach to talent management help me to decide to come to IBM? For me, it was everything, because IBM was able to articulate to me a talent brand. They were able to articulate to me why it would be better to be an IBM versus Accenture. They could articulate what I would be doing, what I'd be measured on, where I would be deployed, and what my career prospects were if I was successful. And I could see very clearly how my objectives were going to map to the organization's objectives. And almost anybody in IBM will tell you that everyone is very, very clear about where they fit in the machine, no pun intended, where they fit in the machine to drive the organization forward. So that's how effective talent management works for us. And the financial performance is there. And we would consider ourselves a financial outperformer, but one that's still got a lot of work to do. We're still not perfect. A lot of work to do there. But the good thing for me is that IBM is my second biggest client, so that means there's a lot of work for me as well going forward for the foreseeable future. So thank you for your attention. Hope that gives a little bit of insight into what IBM has done, but also why we did it. And it comes back to it's all about the money. It's all about financial performance, and that's what talent management means to IBM. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. It's interesting for those of us that heard the opening session with HR thought leader David Ulrich. He talked about the need for HR to really focus on helping create value in our organizations, that was a central task. And clearly, the research that Tim has just provided shows a very strong correlation between talent management and financial performance. And this is true for both large and, to a certain extent, even a larger extent, small companies. So therefore, it's important that all of us in this room really give additional thought to the importance of linking talent management to our strategies and then focusing on financial performance. So next, I'd like to invite Scott Draw to the podium to provide his presentation. But before I do that, are there any questions that any other panel members have regarding Tim's presentation?
I got just one, yeah. Actually, you may live with a lot of new concept and idea and tools because you are the consultant who has to provide new things to the client. So I guess you are familiar to those new things. My question is, throughout your rich, long consulting experience, could you find, were you able to find any shared things? The, company who has been growing for a long time, those company has, it has in talent management area, which is not unchanged and long-lasting and uniqueness, unlike the new things. Could you find any those kind of long-lasting things in talent management area, which can be enabler for growing the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. There, I turn it on now. No, it's a great question because, as you saw, the continuum that I put there, which had what we found organizations at various levels of maturity for talent management. And one thing I wanted to be clear on that chart is just because someone might not be as far along on that chart means they're bad at talent management. That's not what the study showed. In fact, there's a lot of companies that haven't implemented talent management in the way that, for instance, IBM or some others that might be recognized, but they have such a strong talent brand that they're able to overcome some of the challenges they have, whether that be in process or they don't have the technologies in place yet. And we found a lot of companies that were still very, very good at that, despite the fact they might be considered lower on the maturity level there. So I wouldn't want to say that it's a black and white sort of situation when you look at the level of maturity.
Ki-chan, did you have any questions for Tim?
Before asking a question, I'll present brief my experience on the evaluation. So for the talent management also, it should be well evaluated to identify exactly what's their talent. So for the Korean case, I've experienced in Korean Airlines for 7 years. And for the performance appraisal myself, I see some person, for example, people A, already I have in mind I will give him 90 points on 100 like that. Already I have in total or at a glance. But with the evaluation sheet, which S, A, B, C, D of each criterion, I put points. And I sum up, and I found each only 80 points. I go back to each item, and I add some point on that, and I make 90 points. That means even though the system is introduced, it's the actor's role and the actor's point of view which influence much. It's the Korean, maybe Korean talent management system seen by Korean would be different from yours. So your presentation is very shocking to see the role of talent management system which influence to the financial performance. It's very good. But if it applied to Korean companies, would it be possible to have so high correlationships? Or what should we do for Koreans to to adopt more effective and rational TM for Korean companies? If you have some ideas, please.
It's, performance management is a very tricky subject. But one thing that certainly I've learned over time is that if organizations can't use performance management to create true differentiation in performance, it really shouldn't be done at all, frankly, because it can be counterproductive. But having said that, I think the most important thing, regardless of what system or approach that you have around talent management in Korea, is the fact that everybody sees how their objectives are linking to the organization's objectives, and that they know that that their assessment against that is going to be objective and fair relative to others. And without that, it is suboptimal. But it doesn't necessarily mean, again, that it's not a best practice around talent management. I think in a lot of ways, organizations can still get by and go forward and still be very productive. It's just suboptimal in a lot of ways. But the main barrier to that, really, that I find, and it's regardless of whether you're in Asia or you're in Western countries, is it really the issue comes with the middle managers, the people that are doing the managing of talent. Feel that they don't have the skills to do it. They don't know how to give ratings. They don't know how to give objectives, and so they'll tend to inflate them to save face with an individual because they don't have the skills. And so what we find is, regardless of how performance management is done, the key thing is, do the middle managers that are executing on it, do they understand their role in it and the skills that are required to do it properly? That's very important.
Okay, so Scott?
Good afternoon. How are you? Today I'm going to share with you a different model, a little more traditional model in something that we're certainly not perfect at, but it's something that it's a living and dynamic process at the Boeing Company. I want to start by sharing a little bit of context with the organization, because without the context, the last part of the presentation around talent management probably would not make sense. Okay? So that's where we'll start. So to set the foundation, almost 20 years ago now, our CEO, Phil Condit at the time, brought in a new vision for the company. And that vision was people working together as a global company for aerospace leadership. And so at the time, the Boeing Company was primarily an airplane manufacturer in the Puget Sound in the state of Washington, and only about 20% of the business was commercial business or defense business. So over time, what Phil did was go out and acquire the assets of Rockwell International's aerospace and defense segment. And then 9 months later, he convinced the board of directors to also purchase McDonnell Douglas. And then we also made a major acquisition with Hughes Satellite business. And he put those components together with the thought being that sometimes the airplane business, which typically lasts 20 or 30 years, very long life cycle businesses, while it is up, the defense business may be down, and while the defense business may be the other way around at different times. And so we would try to balance those things out. Of course, the three strategies that we also set forth is, first and foremost, is to run a healthy core business, make sure we take care of our customers. We measure that at the Boeing Company by a couple of things: cost, quality, schedule, safety, delivery, and morale. Those are the things that we measure all of our factories on, our suppliers on, and that's how we indicate what's going right, and it helps us identify where problems are. We also took a good, strong internal look at ourselves at the time, and we said, what are we really good at? What are our core competencies at the Boeing Company? And we realized that there was really three of them. The first one is detailed customer knowledge and focus. Do we listen to our customers? One of our biggest customers is the U.S. government. We get a lot of feedback from that customer, and it pays for us to listen to them. But not only that group of customers, but we also have on the commercial side probably about 400 plus customers. And for those customers, they're very demanding. When you spend a couple of $100 million on an airplane, it's not like buying a car, right? You want your $200 million plane to be right. If I was to buy one, I think I would be the same. So detailed customer knowledge and focus is the first one. The second core competency we realize we have is large-scale systems integration. So if you think about the parts and components that make up something like a Boeing 747, it's well over 1 million parts. And so if you think of those 1 million parts coming from 22,000 suppliers from around the world, being very good at logistics, being very good at integration and program management are very key. And so that's another key competence that we have. And then finally is using lean, what we call now Lean Plus, by applying that to understand what is value and removing things that don't create value. And of course for us, who gets to determine value is very important, and that's very clear to us. It's the customer, because without our customers, we have nothing. That's the starting point and the ending point. So those are the three real competencies that we have. And of course, he also brought forth some values that we have. So what do we do today at the Boeing Company? We design, assemble commercial airplanes, of course. Also on the defense side, we do a variety of different things, and about half of the business is commercial and half of the business is defense. We also build satellites and launch satellites, and if you've never seen a rocket launch, it is the most spectacular thing that you've ever seen. I got to see one a few years ago down in Florida, and I was probably 5 or 10 miles away from the launch pad, and I could see the shuttle launch, and just you could see it first, and it was taking off, and it was going rather slowly across the sky, and then right after that you could hear it, of course, and there was this incredible rumble, but you could then feel the ground rumbling from 5 miles away, and it was one of those things that really just shakes your soul. To think that all the power and all of the engineering and all the thought process that went in building these very complex machines. So we do those sort of things. In addition, we do networking of technologies, a big part of our business. We have a financing business as kind of a finance of last resort, an entity called Boeing Capital Corporation. And then we also do some other things through our what we call Phantom Works organization, who puts different future customer requirements together for us. So we have customers in more than 90 countries. Last year we had sales of about $61 billion. This year we're looking at about $68 billion. Tim, I'm not going to go into the financials and EPS. We're quite humbled by the numbers you shared with us a little earlier. I would like to say, though, that IBM just announced that Jim McNerney, our chairman, president, and CEO, just came on your board. So maybe some of that goodwill will come over to us financially as well. So anyway, about 70% of our market is outside of the U.S. for the commercial side of the business. As you can see, we've got manufacturing and technology partners really around the world. Our model is quite simple. We don't have a large footprint of people outside of the U.S. Of the 158,000 employees we have about 8,000 employees that are outside the U.S. Our preference is to go leverage the supply chain. We have about 2,200 or 22,000 suppliers, and it's easier to move work through the supply chain than it is to build a factory, stop it, build it, move it around the world. So that's kind of our strategy in that regard. So who works at the Boeing Company? Who's the leaders? This is I won't go through all of these folks, but I've just put a box around my two bosses. This one is the one that I hear from the most is Shep Hill. Shep Hill is a fantastic leader, comes from the space business. He recently also took on, in addition to Boeing International, to oversee all of our operations outside of the U.S. Shep also brought back into his portfolio our business development and strategy. So Shep is responsible for all mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, and where we're going from a strategic perspective. Shep is an incredible leader who, on one hand, can have a sophisticated talk and dialogue about where we're going to be in the next 10 or 15 years, and at the same time, he will ask me, Scott, where in your spreadsheet did you figure out in cell 27B, I thought you should have had the comma in front of the arrow. And so, so he's incredible the way that he's strategic on one hand, but does not miss any details on the other hand. So a great guy. The other boss of mine is a gentleman by the name of Rick Stevens. And Rick is our Senior Vice President of Human Resources and Administrations. Rick is a rocket scientist and a great program manager, and he leads all of our functions and does a fantastic job. Rick, on the other hand, unlike Shep, who I hear from Shep probably 7 to 10 times a day, I probably talk to Rick about 10 times a year. So he's much more comfortable with ambiguity. Shep's a much more exacting piece, but two really great folks to work with. And the rest of the leaders that you see on there, speaking of talent management, we just moved Jim Albaugh from the defense side of our business over to the commercial side of our business as Scott Carson retires. And so it's a really good testament to what we're doing. And Dennis Muhlenberg, who used to run our global support and services business, was named the CEO. So talent management, succession planning really in action. How are we organized? Again, I talked about kind of being two pillars. These two pillars of BCA and IDS, the commercial and the defense business, is really what we focus on. And then there's the functions that support them. Commercial airplanes headquartered in Seattle had revenues of about half of what we talked about last year, about $28 billion. 68,000 employees scattered all over the place. There's 12,000, so about 3/4 of the planes that are in the sky today, servicing you and me, are Boeing airplanes. Now we have a very formidable customer or competitor in this regard called Airbus. We also refer to them sometimes as the evil empire internally. But they're a very formidable customer or competitor, and they've done a great job of selling and building their planes as well. So it's somebody that we watch very closely. On the defense side, it's headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. It's, as I told you before, builds all kinds of products. Here's a sample of one of those products, the V-22 Osprey that we build with our partners of ours. And the sales there, again, the other half, and it's about 70,000 employees. So I wanted to give you a little bit of that backdrop because if without that backdrop, the rest of the presentation really doesn't really matter a whole lot. Our President, Chairman, and CEO, Jim McNerney, brought in this management model. And if I could tell you everything about the Boeing Company with just one chart, this would be the chart. Okay? This is how we really run the business. And it's really, I'd like to say that it's sexy and it's sophisticated and it's elegant, but quite frankly, it's not. This is what we get measured by, and this is how we think about the company today. Let me just talk with you about it a little bit. Around the perimeter of the chart, you'll see, around the perimeter of this chart, you'll see what we call the leadership attributes. Each one of those attributes are what we select our managers by, what we evaluate our managers and executives by. And I can tell you that every single person who becomes a vice president of the Boeing Company gets reviewed only on those 6 elements. That happens by the executive committee, because we assume that the person is delivering results and they're competent. But if a person doesn't measure up well on those 6 attributes, they wouldn't become a vice president, and their career will not succeed. The inside portion of the chart really starts out with what are our financial objectives. We talk about trying to be in the top quartile financially for our industry, with the 2 pieces of that being growth and productivity. And of course, growth is going to come through satisfying customers, and productivity is going to help us being competitive primarily through our lean processes. And then if you look at financial performance, as we go and continue to grow the company profitably and we reduce cost and take out non-value-added activities, that's going to lead to financial results. That should in turn affect both our stock price, who we don't really put a lot of emphasis on nowadays, but more to the performance of the plan and holding employees and executives accountable to. So all of the executives get held accountable to economic profit. Economic profit being defined as net operating profit after tax minus a capital charge. And so those 2 things lead to hopefully stakeholder satisfaction for both our employees and the communities where we live, and the other stakeholders that we're here to serve. So what do our leaders say about talent management at the company? We got a couple of executive sponsors. Mr. McNerney says better leaders really make better companies. It's that simple. And my boss Rick says the role of leadership is really about creating the right environment. Creating an environment where people feel comfortable talking about issues, talking about problems, talking about how do we make changes to compete more aggressively against our competition. So what's our vision around these talent management? Is to build Boeing leaders who inspire people to achieve world-class business results. The mission portion of that is to make sure that we're creating and deploying effective talent management systems and tools and processes to fill the pipeline worldwide so that we can continue the growth path that we're on. So here are the objectives of the system. As you can see, it starts out by making sure we have the right quantity and quality of leaders available to sustain our business. Number 2 is we're constantly assessing and targeting business development and development of individuals, creating capacity for future growth. So making sure, do we have the right skill gaps? I mean, we spend a lot of time on strategic workforce planning, understanding, what's in the pipeline from a recruiting perspective, where our workforce is going to be retiring. So identifying those gaps, identifying gaps internationally, and what internationally could potentially help us fill some of those gaps. We're spending a lot more time nowadays looking at accelerating leadership. What are some of the things that we can do to take up-and-coming leaders and make them more ready to take on leadership roles? And one of the things that we're doing in that regard is the use of executive mentoring. We require all vice presidents and above to mentor at least one person at the company. And so that is and of course that's a 2-way learning process that we do. I can tell you personally, I have about 4 people that I have a mentoring partnership with, and I learn just as much from them as I'm sure they do from me. And then making sure that we hire the right diversity. The Boeing Company is a company that appreciates diversity of thoughts and opinions, people from different nationalities, because we really think that people with a different perspective can help solve the problem differently because they may have a life experience that taught them to do things a little different way. And that will lead to creative problem solving for us. And then finally, making sure we better equip our leaders to assess the talent while improving visibility of the development processes. So creating more transparency is some of the other things that we're doing in terms of our objectives of the system. The 4 components, we really are trying to identify talent early. And again, they get identified through those 6 leadership attributes that were on the outside of the management model. Then taking that, after you've identified that talent, then working really hard to try to develop it and move it forward. We think the number one thing that we can do to help people that we think have a lot of potential talent is giving them challenging assignments. Of course, we have a fantastic leadership center that I'll talk with you about and leadership programs, but most importantly, it's giving people real challenging assignments. And that also means having the courage as the leaders of the organization to take risk on people. One quick example from my organization, we have a lady who works for me. Her name is Natasha Kuleshova. Natasha started with us at Boeing in Moscow. She started out as a contract employee, and Natasha, after serving in that capacity for a while, became a secretary. We have a educational reimbursement program. Natasha went on to get a degree with the company. We moved her into HR not too long ago, probably about 5 years ago. Natasha got her PhD in economics, and she came to me as we were growing internationally and said, Scott, I got a real passion around being in the Arab world. And so I would like to go to either Saudi Arabia, or I'd like to go to the UAE, or somewhere in the Middle East and serve. So today, if you were to look up who is our HR leader for the United Arab Emirates, it's going to be Natasha Kuleshova. I tell you that story to say, at the end of the day, would you really think about picking a Russian female to put in either Saudi Arabia or UAE? And not necessarily. I can tell you, though, it's just working out wonderfully because we've taken a risk on Natasha. So giving people challenging assignments and really believing in them, and then finally evaluating them. Tillman had a great question posed to him a little bit earlier about performance management system. And our system is still subjective. And we try to work to try to remove the subjectivity, but at the end of the day, it is a subjective measure. And so one of the things we've tried to add to remove a little bit of the subjectivity is what we call one-up reviews. So that it brings it up one level of management to level it out, so you don't have that manager trying to play favoritism a little bit. Okay, now what are the other components of the leadership that we have? We also have, I talked about challenging assignments. We also have a leadership center that has both management programs on it, and they have executive programs on it. And as you can see, we've this acronym here, LTL, is what we use that stands for Leaders Teaching Leaders. Okay, we used to have a lot of consultants that came in that provided some really great ideas for the organization, but we said we're going to move to a model where we're going to expect all of the executives and managers of the company to teach the employees in their organization. Because if you have to teach it, number one, you have to know it. And if you have to teach it, you're going to have to live it, and so it builds some accountability into our systems and processes as well. So we've got 3 different levels of executive programs that we put people through, and we require this of all of the leaders at the Boeing Company. And then finally, where do we do this? We do this at a wonderful place called Boeing Leadership Center. This is located just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. It's a place where 3 rivers come together. You can see it's a rolling hills here, and this is just a great learning environment for our employees. This is a place where we really bring forth one culture of Boeing. We focus on building leadership skills using the leaders teaching leaders model. We try to support the company's strategic business direction through education, training, mentoring, and then another one is candid conversations, because if we're not straightforward with people, and if we're not candid with them and let them know where they really stand, we really feel like we're doing people a disservice. And then finally, the other component that we do at the Leadership Center is in every one of the programs, we give them an actual problem to solve, as they're going through. So there's action learning that take place there as well. And then finally, what's the outcome of this? What's the outcome, and what are we looking for? We're looking for business leaders who are open, diverse, and inclusive for each one of the team members, where we have open and candid performance conversations so people really know where their gaps are. We're looking for people who rely and create a safe environment for all of the team members, and where we have a strong leadership accountability because all of us are measured by that same criteria of economic profit. And then finally, making sure that we have leaders who actively remove barriers for the whole team, because it's not just about the leaders. At the end of the day, it's about 158,000 employees all pulling together for our customers if the organization is going to be successful. So, Steve, that's the end of my presentation, and so
Okay.
I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So, early on, I think one of the sessions that I attended, there was a very interesting discussion on the subject of providing meaningful work and purpose to our employees. And I think that's a challenge in most of our organizations today. And so as Scott was speaking, one of the things that I was struck with, and it was one of his initial slides, was the company's vision statement. And it says, connect and protect people globally. And I think so often in our organizations, we really work hard to try and create a vision for the company's future, something that really inspires our employees. And so this is something that, to me, would be, how can anybody argue with rallying around something like that? So I was impressed by that, and I was also impressed by the really strong connection that your organization has made in terms of connecting talent management with also building Boeing's leadership capability. And I think that's something that we have to focus on in our organizations. And then finally, just another quick comment. It appears from your approach, Scott, and how you present yourself and talk about your company, that Boeing is really an organization that values people. You talked a lot about being open, being diverse, and being inclusive. And these are all characteristics I'm sure that all of us want to see our organizations improve in. So thanks very much for an interesting presentation. And I'd ask both Andy and Keyshawn at this point if either of you have any questions for Scott.
Yeah, I just have one question. I guess the research and development is one of the key functions and one of the key talent group in your organization. So what your company does for fostering those kind of research and development talent for long-term growth, for example, not just for this time, but for next generation or next generation. Yeah.
Andy, that's a great question, and a couple of the things that we do in terms of preparing for the long term is we do have 33,000 engineers that work for our company, and we are an engineering company. And so it must be one of the best jobs at the Boeing Company to work with our Phantom Works group that gets to develop future projects and future products for the company. Some of the things that the group is working on today is how do we apply different technologies to different airplane models. Because we know the environment is a very, very important issue. For example, we have a group in Madrid who recently created a solar cell airplane that achieved horizontal flight on its own, solar powered. So being able to bring engineers in and to give them exciting projects like that is both going to be, while we won't immediately move to anything that radical on the large commercial airplanes that we have, of course, But it's that sort of research and technology that we can parlay that 5 years or 10 years or 15 years down the road, we can take some of the spin-offs from what we're learning from that particular experiment to bring into the airplanes to make it a more environmentally friendly and a better product for the customers.
Well, I've learned much from your presentation, both of you. So, and the talent management is still in the textbook. It's not appeared, you see. I don't teach on the talent management as an organizational behavior teacher. But your idea, and no, your practice, the linkage, the TM with the leadership, already interesting. Maybe I can write a new paper on that, academic papers. Moreover, that I want to add on that the sustainability or sustainable management on that. So some of my academic friends in US and in France, they were curious about that, why the Koreans are not afraid of Japan or Japanese companies. Even the football games, the baseball games, they see that objectively Koreans are weak. But in fact, sometimes they defeat the Japanese and they yell, something like that. So, they want the Western people want to catch up by making the benchmarking of the Sony and the Toyota like that. But sometimes the Korean companies and the Korean see, no, we can defeat Japanese anytime. I say this small episode because we can't explain how something electronics can overcome and become the first runner in the semiconductor industry. There is no reason they couldn't find, and at last, they say, my friend said, maybe it will be an emotional ambition that you have. You have all times pride and some conviction that we can defeat Japanese. So if we compare the Japanese industry and the Korean industry, Japan has more than 50,000 longevity companies, which has more than 100 years history. But we have only one. Maybe we can add the Doosan, but Doosan has changed their business, so only one. Maybe you know, it's Hwalmingsu, Donghua Pharmaceuticals. So if we compare Japanese and the Korean companies, we have intellects of history and competence and lacks everything. But the Samsung maybe and the LG Electronics and SK, maybe they mix up their tradition with new ways of management like TM, as we are talking about. So would you please tell us some about the paradox management, if you have some sense in your management system in Boeing International? Would you please introduce some about that? Yeah.
Keyshawn, it's a great question, and one that I would like to refer back to our Vision 2016. It's no small coincidence that we created Vision 2016 because the company was started in 1916. Because in addition to what you talked about from the Korean companies, very few lasting 100 years, you would see that same phenomena in the U.S. I think of the Fortune 500 companies, Tim, I think there's probably only one or two, just a handful for sure, that continues to stay in business. Now, why is that so? Is it because that some are smarter than others? Or some are faster than others? Or some that even maybe make more money than others? And I think for us at the Boeing Company, it's not any of those things, but we really think that the thing that's going to keep us around for 100 years or 200 years is listening to the customer. If we take our vision off what our customers are telling us, then we find ourselves in trouble. But when we listen to the customers and we give the customers what they want, it works out really well. A quick example. When we decided that we were going to build a new airplane about 7 or 8 years ago, again, I told you we have a company of 33,000 engineers, and what do engineers like to do? Engineers like to build cool things, right? So the engineers came up with an idea that they were going to build a supersonic airplane. This plane was very cool. It had canard rotors on the front end, and it was going to fly just below the speed of sound. We were going to get people anywhere in the world. It's quicker than they've ever been delivered somewhere else in the world. And so we took that design concept out to our airline customers, and we said, hey, what do you think? And our customer says, well, that's a really cool airplane, and it's a really fast airplane, and I'd like to have one, but what I really need for our business is a more efficient airplane. And our people want to go to where they want to go directly from one point to another point. And out of that conversation of listening to the customer, we developed the 787. The 787, we've certainly had some setbacks on that program, but we expect it to be in the air before the end of the year. This airplane is going to be an amazing experience, and it's certainly going to be worth the wait. It's 20% lighter than its competition. It burns 20% less fuel than its competitor, and it's going to be a real moneymaker for the airlines. And for me and you, the flying public, we will be able to pressurize it because it's an all-carbon fuselage at a higher level, which for us will make us have less jet lag. And so it's a great airplane. The customers have responded extremely well. For example, over the 30 years that we've built the 747 airplane, we at KAL, when you were back at KAL, you guys have 747s. We've built 1,500 747s over the life of that program. The 787, which hasn't even flown yet, we've sold over 850 of those airplanes already. And so that's the real power of listening to the customer and adjusting to what the customer wants to do, not necessarily what we selfishly want to do.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So in the remaining minutes, what I'd like to do, I realize that a number of the participants here today are students. And as students, one of the questions that I'm often asked is, how do I become a global talent? How do I prepare myself to work for a multinational company and play an important role in the company's future? So I'm going to ask our panelists for their recommendations. And so let me begin with Scott. Scott, what are some of the characteristics that you look for in a global talent?
Steve, great question. I think there's two attributes that I look for people that want to aspire to be global talent. And those two attributes are, one, the ability to deal and work in ambiguity is first and foremost. So a person that, and it doesn't matter if they're coming from an Asian area that we may move to Europe or Western Europe, or where we may move someone from the Middle East to Asia, but a person who can be comfortable with a new surrounding or a different surrounding. That means that that person has to have a curiosity about what the environment is and how do they make a difference in whatever the measures are. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing would be critical thinking skills. Can a person really analyze what are the parameters and frame a problem correctly? And we think this would apply no matter if it's law, if it's engineering, if it's HR, if it's finance. Having people that can really think through issues, size up the problem, come up with creative solutions that meet the stakeholders' needs are the two things that I would say.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. Tim, over to you.
Yeah, I would echo, when I'm looking for graduates to join my team, the main attribute that I look for and my team look for is something Scott mentioned, which is curiosity. And that is very important from our perspective, because people who are curious about what's around them, one, tend to have the ability to think creatively and be innovative. They also tend to be, interestingly enough, they tend to have a propensity to be a good leader. Somebody who's curious is not only curious about what's around them, but they're curious about themselves as well. And they understand themselves, and they understand their strengths and their weaknesses, and they know how to use that in the context of other people. And that helps them be successful. So we look for those kinds of attributes. I think an attribute that's going to emerge, though, in the near future is young people who aspire to be a global citizen, someone who will work just about anywhere. And that can be you working at home, but you're willing to connect with people in anywhere and understand their culture, understand where they're coming from, and work effectively, or get on one of Scott's airplanes and fly to see them as well. But I think that's going to be an emerging attribute that we're going to be looking for. It's those that are, want to work as a global citizen and really see themselves as sort of I got my passport and I'm ready to go. I think that'll be important and more important in the future.
Okay. Andy, quickly, any...
Yeah. To work at Mercer, there is only one thing. Who has to live with our Mercer value? So there are 9 principles of Mercer value, and one of them is desire to challenge it for future growth. So I think, to be the Mercer consultant globally, I think the most important thing is not the professional skill or knowledge, but how to deal with the company value. So that's one key thing to be the good player in multinational company. Because they don't stick onto the geography, but they stick onto their company itself and the client. So that's why we are not calculating our revenue by geography or office, but by client only. So yeah.
Okay. Ki-chan, do you have something to add?
So briefly, I'd like to suggest one point. So for individual level or company level, I'd like to suggest find out your strong point first. As for example, our small and medium companies around 10 years ago, they flew to China thinking that there will be their strong points. But they went there to complement only the cost of the wages. But years later, they lose the points and became fall in bankruptcy or came back to Korea. That means to know your strong points is the most important in talent management. So we think we know well our strong points, but usually not. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Ki-chan. Let's take the remaining 5 minutes here, and we'll entertain questions from the audience. And please specifically address your questions to any of my panelist members here. Yes, in the front row. Can we have a microphone right here in the front row? Bali. 감사합니다.
My name is Ulrich. I'm from POSCO. I was quite impressed with the two gentlemen's presentations. I think the Boeing's leadership, their leaders' talent management is quite impressive. But I'm not sure if most American companies have this kind of program. But according to some statistics, many companies leave the paired because the CEOs, leaders concentrate on short-term performance. That means regardless of a good system or a good program, but the most important thing is that you must have a good culture, company culture, or company DNA. Without that kind of thing, even if you have a good leadership program or the leadership talent management, but you cannot succeed without the good DNA. I think the basic element in the company is good DNA or the philosophy or culture, I think.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. We're fortunate to have Jim McNerney, who spent many, many years at General Electric. At the end, as Jack Welch was retiring, he made a decision between Jim McNerney and Jeffrey Imelts, and quite frankly, I have a lot of respect and honor for Jack Welch, but I'm glad he made a bad decision there because Jim McNerney ended up going to 3M before we convinced him to come to the Boeing Company. But having a strong leader who really believes in leadership development and believes that at the core of their being is something that's really something that we think is going to help us.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. And let's see, the woman over here on this side. Yes.
Thank you for the chance.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, I'm Haejun Kim from the Institute of 21st Century Competitiveness. Thank you for the insightful and very impressive presentations from both of you. And I have a question to Dr. Scott Drutch. Well, as I've done a lot of research about the Korean companies, more and more companies in Korea are trying to emphasizing on the talent management. And they're benchmarking great companies like GE, Boeing, and IBM. But what happens, unfortunately, is, for example, I'll just give an example. One of the conglomerates in Korea has benchmarked the workout of GE. And at the end of the day, what they did was taking an exam about a book called Workout. So in your presentation, you mentioned about the candid and open conversations. So I'd like to ask you how Boeing brought out the candid and open culture in the company. Thank you.
It's a good question. It's a journey that we're on and not one that we've arrived at. We really think that it's something that we have to remind ourselves to do all the time. So no matter whether our employees are in Europe or in Asia or even in the US, it's a really difficult job to sit across a table from an employee and let them know their shortcomings. It's not most people's first inclination. Sometimes people do it and do it well. And so what we're trying to do is equip managers to do it in a compassionate but yet straightforward way, in a way that inspires people and not in a way that tries to tear people down. Your point about taking one concept from one company and applying it to another, we use the word within our international team called harmonization. And it's trying to take maybe the spirit and intent of something like workout and say, how does that apply in the Boeing culture? So we would rarely go see something like workout at Boeing or even Six Sigma, but you'll see something called Lean, and we try to bring different programs that we learn from others in, but we always try to massage it within the culture of our company.
I would just like to echo Tim's remarks. I worked at General Electric and was there during the period in which workout was implemented, and we had David Ulrich visit us at SK yesterday. And we spent some time talking about that, and he said, I was the very person that was involved in helping create workout at General Electric. So I agree with Scott that you can't use a one-size-fits-all approach, that you have to take a look at your culture and your key drivers, your key areas of focus, your key transformational drivers, and see if it makes sense. I think we also did something at GE called town hall meetings, which kind of in the spirit of what Boeing has been doing helps to create that more inclusive culture. So I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. Now, someone over here had a microphone in his hand, and I saw that, so let me give you your opportunity. Go ahead.
네, 코리아 디지털 컨텐츠 연합 전충헌이라고 합니다. 팀 링고 IBM 부사장님께 질문 드리겠습니다. IBM은 저희가 알기로는 제조업으로 글로벌 기업으로 성장하다가 중국으로 M&A를 시키고 서비스 기업으로 대전환을 해서 성공을 한 대표적인 기업 모델이라고 생각을 합니다. 바로 그런 제조업 중심의 기업에서 서비스 중심의 기업으로 일종의 이제 퀀텀 점프를 한 사례인데요. 아까 우리 팀 부사장님께서 인재 관리 전략과 재무 성과하고의 연계 중요성을 강조하셨는데 이 부분은 이제 비즈니스 전략의 포지셔닝의 이동 이런 부분과도 연계가 되어 있는 것 같습니다. 저희가 볼 때 우리 한국의 기업의 입장에서 보면 지금 제조업은 상당 부분 한계 기업에 지금 도달해 있는 사례가 나타나고 있고 서비스 부문으로의 전환과 성장을 지금 도모하는 그런 어떤 전환기에 있습니다. 바로 그런 부분에서 인재 관리라고 하는 부분이 제조업 중심의 어떤 패러다임에서 서비스 중심의 패러다임으로 전환하는 데 있어서 IBM의 사례는 매우 귀중한 어떤 경험이 되지 않을까 생각합니다. 관련돼서 우리 팀 부서장님이 최근에 IBM에 합류하셨다고 하셨는데 그 IBM이 그 제조업에서 서비스 모델로 전환하는 시점은 꽤 오래됐죠 이미. 그래서 그 관련된 사례를 우리 한국 기업에 참고 귀중한 말씀해 주시면 굉장히 큰 참고가 될 것 같습니다. 감사합니다.
Yeah, first of all, that's a great question and a great observation. And you pointed out an oversight that I missed in my presentation, which is a really important point, that IBM in a fairly short period of time, really from about 2002 to today, shifted rapidly from a manufacturing company and a software company to a services company. In fact, just to give you some statistics to sort of show the shift there, the vast majority of IBM's revenues and sales just as early as 2000 were around hardware. And today, nearly 60% of the company is now services-based. So it's flipped in a very short period of time. And you know, I think the key message I would give, and probably the one that our chairman would give, is that you know, that didn't happen by Sam saying we're going to sell this part and we're going to buy that part. That certainly was an important element of changing the company. But in the end, it was about recruiting basically an entire new workforce. And that involved buying PwC, but it also involved bringing in new people. So for instance, as early as 2002, the vast majority of people in IBM had been there for 5 years or more. But today, over 60% of IBMers have been there 5 years or less. And so the way this happened was through a recruitment effort. So it was the first point, first step in the model I showed earlier around talent management, be able to effectively target and recruit people with the right skills, you know, with a mindset around services. Really difficult thing to do. There's not a lot of people who have that background out there, so you have to be very good at that. The other thing then is once you get them, I think we all know people who do services as a career usually have multiple companies that they work for over time. So retaining them, very, very difficult. So they need to be given clear objectives. They need to be given compensation and bonuses based on achieving those objectives. And they need to be able to see where that career will lead them. Otherwise, they're inclined to leave very quickly. So my main advice, it's great to go out and acquire companies, but it really, the growth in moving from a manufacturing to a services model is going out and finding people and convincing them based on your talent brand to come and join you. And when you do buy a company like PwC, which IBM did, which is most of my team, it's convincing them to stay and not leave once you've bought them. So those are two really critical elements of taking a company that has a manufacturing basis and switching it to a services company. And talent management could not be, you know, more important in that situation. So that's a great question. And by the way, so I would just say I think there's a huge opportunity for Korea in potentially switching some of their companies more towards services. And I would actually, Dr. Park, say that although Japan has had a lot of companies that have been around for 100 years, I actually remain more impressed with Korea because what Korea has been able to do in 40 years is quite dramatic. And I'm sure that that comes down to an ability for Korean companies to adapt and change quickly. So I think that bodes very, very well for Korea in the future and for making the switch that this gentleman mentioned a moment ago. I think it's a core competence that Koreans have.
Okay, thank you. We've about run out of time, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelist members. Please give them a round of applause. And also, I'd like to thank all of you for your active participation. This is the last session of the day, but you're still very active. And so, thank you very much. Kamsahamnida.